Now, India is four-sided in shape, and the side which faces east and that which faces south are embraced by the Great Sea, while that which faces north is separated by the Immodus range of mountains from that part of Scythia, which is inhabited by the Scythians known as the Sakians, known as the Sake, and the fourth side, which is turned towards the west, is marked off by the river known as the Indus, which is the largest of all streams after the Nile. As for its magnitude, India as a whole, they say, extends from east to west 28,000 stades, and from north to south 32,000. And because it is of such magnitude, it is believed to take in a great extent of the sun's course in summer than any other part of the world, and in many places at the Cape of India, the gnomons of sundials may be seen which do not cast a shadow, while at night the bears are not visible. In the most southerly parts, not even Arcturus can be seen, and indeed in that region, they say, the shadows fall towards the south. Now, India has many lofty mountains that abound in fruit trees of every variety, and many large and fertile plains, which are remarkable for their beauty and are supplied with water by a multitude of rivers. The larger part of the country is well watered and for this reason yields 2 crops each year, and it abounds in all kinds of animals, remarkable for their great size and strength, land animals as well as birds. It also breeds elephants, both in the greatest numbers and of the largest size, providing them with sustenance in abundance, and it is because of this food that the elephants of this land are much more powerful than those produced in Libya. Consequently, large numbers of them are made captive by the Indians and trained for warfare, and it is found that they play a great part in turning the scale to victory. The same is true of the inhabitants also, the abundant supply of food making them of unusual height and bulk of body, and another result is that they are skilled in the arts, since they breathe a pure air and drink water of the finest quality. And the earth, in addition to producing every fruit which admits of cultivation, also contains rich underground veins of every kind of ore, for there are found in it much silver and gold, not a little copper and iron, and tin also, and whatever else is suitable for adornment, necessity, and the trappings of war. In addition to the grain of Demeter, there grows throughout India much millet, which is irrigated by the abundance of running water supplied by the rivers, pulse in large quantities and of superior quality, rice also, and the plant called Bosporos, and in addition to these many more plants which are useful for food, and most of these are native to the country. It also yields not a few other edible fruits that are able to sustain animal life, but to write about them would be a long task. This is the reason, they say, why a famine has never visited India or, in general, any scarcity of what is suitable for gentle fare. For, since there are 2 rainy seasons in the country each year during the winter rains, the sowing is made of the wheat crop as among other peoples, while in the second, which comes at the summer solstice, it is the general practice to plant the rice and Bosporos, as well as sesame and millet, and in most years the Indians are successful in both crops, and they never lose everything, since the fruit of one or the other sowing comes to maturity. The fruits also which flourish wild, and the roots which grow in the marshy places, by reason of their remarkable sweetness, provide the people with a great abundance of food. For practically all the plains of India enjoy the sweet moisture from the rivers and from the rains, which come with astonishing regularity, in a kind of fixed cycle, every year in the summer, since warm showers fall in abundance from the enveloping atmosphere, and the heat ripens the roots in the marshes, especially those of the tall reed. Furthermore, the customs of the Indians contribute towards there never being any lack of food among them, for whereas, in the case of all the rest of mankind, their enemies ravage the land and cause it to remain uncultivated, yet among the Indians the workers of the soil are let alone as sacred and inviolable, and such of them as labour near the battle-lanes have no feeling of the dangers. For although both parties to the war kill one another in their hostilities, yet they leave uninjured those who are engaged in tilling the soil, considering that they are the common benefactors of all, nor do they burn the lands of their opponents or cut down their orchards. The land of the Indians has also many large navigable rivers which have their sources in the mountains lying to the north and then flow through the level country, and not a few of these unite and empty into the river known as the Ganges. This river, which is 30 stades in width, flows from north to south and empties into the ocean, forming the boundary towards the east of the tribe of the Gandharidae, which possesses the greatest number of elephants and the largest in size. Consequently, no foreign king has ever subdued this country, all alien nations being fearful of both the multitude and the strength of the beasts. In fact, even Alexander of Macedon, although he had subdued all Asia, refrained from making war upon the Gandharidae alone of all peoples. For when he had arrived at the Ganges River with his entire army, after his conquest of the rest of the Indians, upon learning that the Gandharidae had 4,000 elephants equipped for war, he gave up his campaign against them. The river, which is nearly the equal of the Ganges, and is called the Indus, rises like the Ganges in the north, but as it empties into the ocean forms a boundary of India, and in its course, through an expanse of level plain, it receives not a few navigable rivers, the most notable being the Hypanis, Hydaspes, and Assassines. And in addition to these three rivers, a vast number of others of every description traverse the country and bring it about that the land is planted in many gardens and crops of every description. Now, for the multitude of rivers and the exceptional supply of water, the philosophers and students of nature among them advance the following cause. The countries which surround India, they say, such as Scythia, Bactria, and Aria, are higher than India, and so it is reasonable to assume that the waters which come together from every side into the country lying below them gradually cause the regions to become soaked and to generate a multitude of rivers. And a peculiar thing happens in the case of one of the rivers of India, known as the Scylla, which flows from a spring of the same name, for it is the only river in the world possessing the characteristic that nothing cast into it floats, but that everything, strange to say, sinks to the bottom. Now India as a whole, being of a vast extent, is inhabited, as we are told, by many other peoples of every description, and not one of them had its first origin in a foreign land, but all of them are thought to be autochthonous. It never receives any colony from abroad, nor has it ever sent one to any other people. According to their myths, the earliest human beings used for food the fruits of the earth which grew wild and for clothing the skins of the native animals, as was done by the Greeks. Similarly, too, the discovery of the several arts and of all other things which are useful for life was made gradually, necessity itself showing the way to a creature which was well endowed by nature and had, as its assistants for every purpose, hands and speech and sagacity of mind. The most learned men among the Indians recount a myth which it may be appropriate to set forth in brief form. This, then, is what they say. In the earliest times, when the inhabitants of their land were still dwelling in scattered clan villages, Dionysus came to them from the regions to the west of them with a notable army, and he traversed all India, since there was as yet no notable city which would have been able to oppose him. But when an oppressive heat came, and the soldiers of Dionysus were being consumed by a pestilential sickness, this leader, who was conspicuous for his wisdom, led his army out of the plains into the hill country. Here, where cool breezes blew and the spring waters flowed pure at their very sources, the army got rid of its sickness. The name of this region of the hill country, where Dionysus relieved his forces of the sickness, is Meros, and it is because of this fact that the Greeks have handed down to posterity in their account of this god the story that Dionysus was nourished in a thigh, Meros. After this, he took in hand the storing of the fruits and shared this knowledge with the Indians, and he communicated to them the discovery of wine and of all the other things useful for life. Furthermore, he became the founder of notable cities by gathering the villages together in well-situated regions, and he both taught them to honor the deity and introduced laws and courts, and, in brief, since he had been the introducer of many good works, he was regarded as a god and received immortal honors. They also recount that he carried along with his army a great number of women, and that when he joined battle in his wars, he used the sounds of drums and cymbals, since the trumpet had not yet been discovered. And after he had reigned over all India for 52 years, he died of old age. His sons, who succeeded to the sovereignty, passed the rule on successively to their descendants. But finally, many generations later, their sovereignty was dissolved, and the cities received a democratic form of government. As for Dionysus, then, and his descendants, such is the myth as it is related by the inhabitants of the hill country of India, and with regard to Heracles, they say that he was born among them, and they assign to him, in common with the Greeks, both the club and the lion's skin. Moreover, as their account tells us, he was far superior to all other men in strength of body and in courage, and cleared both land and sea of their wild beasts. And marrying several wives, he begot many sons, but only one daughter, and when his sons attained to manhood, dividing all India into as many parts as he had male children, he appointed all his sons kings, and rearing his single daughter, he appointed her also a queen. Likewise, he became the founder of not a few cities, the most renowned and largest of which he called Palibothra. In this city he also constructed a costly palace and settled a multitude of inhabitants, and he fortified it with remarkable ditches, which were filled with water from the river. And when Heracles passed from among men, he received immortal honor, but his descendants, though they held the kingship during many generations and accomplished notable deeds, made no campaign beyond their own frontiers and dispatched no colony to any other people. But many years later, most of the cities had received a democratic form of government, although among certain tribes the kingship endured until the time when Alexander crossed over into Asia. As for the customs of the Indians which are peculiar to them, a man may consider one which was drawn up by their ancient wise men to be the most worthy of admiration, for the law has ordained that under no circumstances shall anyone among them be a slave, but that all shall be free and respect the principle of equality in all persons. For those, they think, who have learned neither to domineer over others nor to subject themselves to others, will enjoy a manner of life best suited to all circumstances, since it is silly to make laws on the basis of equality for all persons, and yet to establish inequalities in social intercourse. The whole multitude of the Indians is divided into 7 castes, the first of which is formed of the order of the philosophers, which in number is smaller than the rest of the castes, but in dignity ranks first. For being exempt from any service to the state, the philosophers are neither the masters nor the servants of the others, but they are called upon by the private citizens both to offer the sacrifices which are required in their lifetime and to perform the rites for the dead, as having proved themselves to be most dear to the gods, and as being especially experienced in the matters that relate to the underworld, and for this service they receive both notable gifts and honors. Moreover, they furnish great services to the whole body of the Indians, since they are invited at the beginning of the year to the great synod and foretell to the multitude droughts and rains, as well as the favorable blowing of winds and epidemics, and whatever else can be of aid to their auditors. For both the common folk and the king, by learning in advance what is going to take place, store up from time to time that of which there will be a shortage and prepare beforehand, from time to time, anything that will be needed. And the philosopher who has erred in his predictions is subjected to no other punishment than obloquy and keeps silence for the remainder of his life. The second caste is that of the farmers, who, it would appear, are far more numerous than the rest. These, being exempt from war duties and every other service to the state, devote their entire time to labor in the fields, and no enemy coming upon a farmer in the country would think of doing him injury, but they look upon the farmers as common benefactors and therefore refrain from every injury to them. Consequently, the land, remaining as it does unravaged and being laden with fruits, provides the inhabitants with a great supply of provision. And the farmers spend their lives upon the land with their children and wives and refrain entirely from coming down into the city. For the land they pay rent to the kind, since all India is royal land, and no man of private station is permitted to possess any ground, and apart from the rental they pay a 4th part into the royal treasury. The third division is that of the neathards and shepherds, and, in general, of all the herdsmen who do not dwell in a city or village, but spend their lives in tents, and these men are also hunters and rid the country of both birds and wild beasts, and since they are practiced in this calling and follow it with zest, they are bringing India under cultivation, although it still abounds in many wild beasts and birds of every kind, which eat up the seed sown by the farmers. The 4th caste is that of the artisans. Of these, some are armorers and some fabricate for the farmers or certain others the things useful for the services they perform. And they are not only exempt from paying taxes, but they even receive rations from the royal treasury. The 5th caste is that of the military, which is at hand in case of war. They are second in point of number, and indulge to the fullest in relaxation and pastimes in the periods of peace. and the maintenance of the whole multitude of the soldiers and of the horses and elephants for use in war is met out of the royal treasury. The sixth caste is that of the inspectors. These men inquire into and inspect everything that is going on throughout India and report back to the kings, or, in case the state to which they are attached has no king, to the magistrates. The seventh caste is that of the deliberators and chancellors, whose concern is with the decisions which affect the common welfare. In point of number, this group is the smallest, but in nobility of birth and wisdom the most worthy of admiration, for from their body are drawn the advisers for the kings and the administrators of the affairs of state and the judges of disputes, and, speaking generally, they take their leaders and magistrates from among these men. Such, in general terms, are the groups into which the body politic of the Indians is divided. Furthermore, no one is allowed to marry a person of another caste or to follow another calling or trade, as, for instance, that one who is a soldier should become a farmer or an artisan should become a philosopher. The country of the Indians also possesses a vast number of enormous elephants, which far surpass all others, both in strength and size. Nor does this animal cover the female in a peculiar manner, as some say, but in the same way as horses and all other four-footed beasts, and their period of gestation is in some cases 16 months at the least, and in other cases 18 months at the most. They bring forth like horses, but one young for the most part, and the females suckle their young for 6 years. The span of life for most of them is about that of men who attain the greatest age, though some which have reached the highest age have lived 200 years. There are among the Indians also magistrates appointed for foreigners who take care that no foreigner shall be wronged. Moreover, should any foreigner fall sick, they bring him a physician and care for him in every other way. And if he dies, they bury him and even turn over such property as he has to his relatives. Again, their judges examine accurately matters of dispute and proceed rigorously against such as are guilty of wrongdoing. As for India, then, and its antiquities, we shall be satisfied with what has been said. But now, in turn, we shall discuss the Scythians who inhabit the country bordering upon India. This people originally possessed little territory, but later, as they gradually increased in power, they seized much territory by reason of their deeds of might and their bravery, and advanced their nation to great leadership and renown. At first, then, they dwelt on the Araxes river, altogether few in number and despised because of their lack of renown. But since one of their early kings was warlike and of unusual skill as a general, they acquired territory in the mountains as far as the Caucasus, and in the steppes along the ocean and Lake Maeotis, and the rest of that country as far as the Tanais river. At a later time, as the Scythians recount the myth, there was born among them a maiden sprung from the earth. The upper parts of her body as far as her waist were those of a woman, but the lower parts were those of a snake. With her Zeus they begat a son, whose name was Scythe. This son became more famous than any who had preceded him, and called the folk Scythians, after his own name. Now, among the descendants of this king, there were 2 brothers who were distinguished for their valor, the one named Pallas and the other Napes. And since these 2 performed renowned deeds and divided the kingship between them, some of the people were called Palli after one of them, and some Napai after the other. But some time later, the descendants of these kings, because of their unusual valor and skill as generals, subdued much of the territory beyond the Tanais river as far as Thrace, and advancing with their armies to the other side, they extended their power as far as the Nile in Egypt. And after enslaving many great peoples which lay between the Thracians and the Egyptians, they advanced the empire of the Scythians on the one side as far as the ocean to the east, and on the other side to the east, and on the other side to the Caspian Sea and Lake Maeotis. For this people increased to great strength, and had notable kings, one of whom gave his name to the Sake, another to the Massagetae, another to the Arimaspi, and several other tribes received their names in like manner. It was by these kings that many of the conquered peoples were removed to other homes, and 2 of these became very great colonies. The one was composed of Assyrians, and was removed to the land between Paphlagonia and Pontus, and the other was drawn from Media and planted along the Tanais, its people receiving the name Sauromatai. Many years later, this people became powerful and ravaged a large part of Scythia, and destroying utterly all whom they subdued, they turned most of the land into a desert. After these events, there came in Scythia a period of revolutions, in which the sovereigns were women endowed with exceptional valor. For among these peoples the women train for war just as do the men, and in acts of manly valor are in no wise inferior to the men. Consequently, distinguished women have been the authors of many great deeds, not in Scythia alone, but also in the territory bordering upon it. For instance, when Cyrus the king of the Persians, the mightiest ruler of his day, made a campaign with a vast army into Scythia, the queen of the Scythians not only cut the army of the Persians to pieces, but she even took Cyrus prisoner and crucified him. And the nation of the Amazons, after it was once organized, was so distinguished for its manly prowess that it not only overran much of the neighboring territory, but even subdued a large part of Europe and Asia. But for our part, since we have mentioned the Amazons, we feel that it is not foreign to our purpose to discuss them, even though what we shall say will be so marvelous that it will resemble a tale from mythology. Now in the country along the Thermodon River, as the account goes, the sovereignty was in the hands of a people among whom the women held the supreme power, and its women performed the services of war just as did the men. Of these women, one, who possessed the royal authority, was remarkable for her prowess in war and her bodily strength, and gathering together an army of women she drilled it in the use of arms and subdued in war some of the neighboring people. And since her valor and fame increased, she made war upon people after people of neighboring lands, and as the tide of her fortune continued favorable, she was so filled with pride that she gave herself the appellation of daughter of Ares, but to the men she assigned the spinning of wool and such other domestic duties as belonged to women. Laws were also established by her, by virtue of which she led forth the women to the contests of war, but upon the men she fastened humiliation and slavery. And as for their children, they mutilated both the legs and the arms of the males, incapacitating them in this way for the demands of war, and in the case of the females, they seared the right breast that it might not project when their bodies matured and be in the way. And it is for this reason that the nation of the Amazons received the appellation it bears. In general, this queen was remarkable for her intelligence and ability as a general, and she founded a great city named Themyscira at the mouth of the Thermodon River and built there a famous palace. Furthermore, in her campaigns she devoted much attention to military discipline and at the outset subdued all her neighbors as far as the Tanais River. And this queen, they say, accomplished the deeds which have been mentioned, and fighting brilliantly in a certain battle, she ended her life heroically. The daughter of this queen, the account continues, on succeeding to the throne, emulated the excellence of her mother, and even surpassed her in some particular deeds. For instance, she exercised in the chase the maidens from their earliest girlhood, and drilled them daily in the arts of war, and she also established magnificent festivals both to Ares and to the Artemis who is called Tauropolis. Then she campaigned against the territory lying beyond the Tanais and subdued all the peoples one after another as far as Thrace. And returning to her native land with much booty, she built magnificent shrines to the deities mentioned above, and by reason of her kindly rule over her subjects received from them the greatest approbation. She also campaigned on the other side and subdued a large part of Asia and extended her power as far as Syria. After the death of this queen, as their account continues, women of her family, succeeding to the queenship from time to time, ruled with distinction and advanced the nation of the Amazons in both power and fame. And many generations after these events, when the excellence of these women had been noised abroad through the whole inhabited world, they say that Heracles, the son of Alcmene in Zeus, was assigned by Eurystheus the labor of securing the girdle of Hippolyte the Amazon. Consequently, he embarked on this campaign, and coming off victorious in a great battle, he not only cut to pieces the army of the Amazons, but also, after taking captive Hippolyte together with her girdle, completely crushed this nation. Consequently, the neighboring barbarians, despising the weakness of this people and remembering against them their past injuries, waged continuous wars against the nation to such a degree that they left in existence not even the name of the race of the Amazon. For a few years after the campaign of Heracles against them, they say, during the time of the Trojan War, Penthesilea, the queen of the surviving Amazons, who was a daughter of Ares and had slain one of her kindred, fled from her native land because of the sacrilege, and fighting as an ally of the Trojans after the death of Hector, she slew many of the Greeks, and after gaining distinction in the struggle, she ended her life heroically at the hands of Achilles. Now they say that Penthesilea was the last of the Amazons to win distinction for bravery, and that for the future, the race diminished more and more and then lost all its strength. Consequently, in later time, whenever any writers recount their prowess, men consider the ancient stories about the Amazons to be fictitious tales. Now for our part, since we have seen fit to make mention of the regions of Asia which lie to the north, we feel that it will not be foreign to our purpose to discuss the legendary accounts of the Hyperboreans. Of those who have written about the ancient myths, Hecataeus and certain others say that, in the regions beyond the land of the Celts, there lies in the ocean an island no smaller than Sicily. This island, the account continues, is situated in the north and is inhabited by the Hyperboreans, who are called by that name because their home is beyond the point whence the north wind blows, and the island is both fertile and productive of every crop, and since it has an unusually temperate climate, it produces 2 harvests each year. Moreover, the following legend is told concerning it. Leto was born on this island, and for that reason Apollo is honored among them above all other gods, and the inhabitants are looked upon as priests of Apollo, after a manner, since daily they praise this god continuously in song and honor him exceedingly. And there is also on the island both a magnificent sacred precinct of Apollo and a notable temple, which is adorned with many votive offerings and is spherical in shape. Furthermore, a city is there which is sacred to this god, and the majority of its inhabitants are players on the cithara, and these continually play on this instrument in the temple and sing hymns of praise to the god, glorifying his deed. The Hyperboreans also have a language, we informed, which is peculiar to them and are most friendly disposed towards the Greeks, and especially towards the Athenians and the Delians, who have inherited this goodwill from most ancient time. The myth also relates that certain Greeks visited the Hyperboreans and left behind them their costly votive offerings bearing inscriptions in Greek letters. And in the same way, Abaris, a Hyperborean, came to Greece in ancient times and renewed the goodwill and kinship of his people to the Delians. They say also that the moon, as viewed from this island, appears to be but a little distance from the earth and to have upon its prominences, like those of the earth, which are visible to the eye. The account is also given that the god visits the island every 19 years, the period in which the return of the stars to the same place in the heavens is accomplished, and for this reason the 19-year period is called by the Greeks the year of Meton. At the time of this appearance of the god he both plays on the cithara and dances continuously the night through from the vernal equinox until the rising of the Pleiades, expressing in this manner his delight in his successes. And the kings of this city and the supervisors of the sacred precinct are called Boreadae, since they are descendants of Boreas, and the succession to these positions is always kept in their family. But now that we have examined these matters, we shall turn our account to the other parts of Asia which have not yet been described, and more especially to Arabia. This land is situated between Syria and Egypt, and is divided among many peoples of diverse characteristics. Now the eastern parts are inhabited by Arabs, who bear the name of Nabateans and range over a country which is partly desert and partly waterless, though a small section of it is fruitful, and they lead a life of brigandage, and overrunning a large part of the neighboring territory they pillage it, being difficult to overcome in war. For in the waterless region, as it is called, they have dug wells at convenient intervals and have kept the knowledge of them hidden from the peoples of all other nations, and so they retreat in a body into this region out of danger. For, since they themselves know about the places of hidden water and open them up, they have for their use drinking water in abundance, but such other peoples as pursue them, being in want of a watering place, by reason of their ignorance of the wells, in some cases perish because of the lack of water, and in other cases regain their native land in safety only with difficulty and after suffering many ill. Consequently, the Arabs who inhabit this country, being difficult to overcome in war, remain always unenslaved. Furthermore, they never at any time accept a man of another country as their overlord and continuous to maintain their liberty unimpaired. Consequently, neither the Assyrians of old, nor the kings of the Medes and Persians, nor yet those of the Macedonians have been able to enslave them, and although they led many great forces against them, they never brought their attempts to a successful conclusion. There is also in the land of the Nabateans a rock which is exceedingly strong, since it has but one approach, and using this ascent they mount it a few at a time, and thus store their possessions in safety. And a large lake is also there, which produces asphalt in abundance, and from it they derive not a little revenue. It has a length of about 500 stades and a width of about 60, and its water is so ill-smelling and so very bitter that it cannot support fish or any of the other animals which commonly live in water. And although great rivers of remarkable sweetness empty into it, the lake gets the better of them by reason of its evil smell, and from its centre it spouts forth once a year a great mass of asphalt, which sometimes extends for more than 3 plethra, and sometimes for only 2. And when this occurs, the barbarians who live about the lake usually call the larger flow a bull, and to the smaller one they give the name carp. Since the asphalt floats on the surface of the lake, to those who view it from a distance, it takes the appearance of an island. And the fact is that the emission of the asphalt is made known to the natives 20 days before it takes place. For, to a distance of many stades around the lake, the odour, borne on the wind, sails them, and every piece of silver and gold and brass in the locality loses its characteristic lustre. But this returns again as soon as all the asphalt has been spouted forth, and the region round about, by reason of its being exposed to fire and to the evil odours, renders the bodies of the inhabitants susceptible to disease, and makes the people very short-lived. Yet the land is good for the growing of palms, wherever it happens to be traversed by rivers with usable water, or to be supplied with springs which can irrigate it. And there is also found in these regions in a certain valley the balsam tree, as it is called, from which they receive a substantial revenue, since this tree is found nowhere else in the inhabited world, and the use of it for medicinal purposes is most highly valued by physicians. That part of Arabia which borders upon the waterless and desert country is so different from it that, because both of the multitude of fruits which grow therein and of its other good things, it has been called Arabia Felix. For the reed and the rush and every other growth that has a spicy scent are produced in great abundance, as is also, speaking generally, every kind of fragrant substance which is derived from leaves, and the land is distinguished in its several parts by the varied odours of the gums which drip from them. For myrrh and that frankincense which is most dear to the gods, and is exported throughout the entire inhabited world, are produced in the farthest parts of this land, and costos and cassia and cinnamon and all other plants of this nature grow there in fields and thickets of such depth that what all other peoples sparingly place upon the altars of the gods is actually used by them as fuel under their pots, and what is found among all other peoples in small specimens there supplies material for the mattresses of the servants in their homes. Moreover, the cinnamon, as it is called, which is exceptionally useful, and resin of the pine and the terebinth are produced in these regions in great abundance and of sweet odour. And in the mountains grow not only silver fir and pine in abundance, but also cedar and the Phoenician cedar in abundance, and boraton, as it is called. There are also many other kinds of fruit-bearing plants of sweet odour, which yield sap and fragrances most pleasing to such as approach them. Indeed, the very earth itself is by its nature full of a vapour which is like sweet incense. Consequently, in certain regions of Arabia, when the earth is dug up, there are discovered veins of sweet odour, in the working of which quarries of extraordinary magnitude are formed, and from these they gather stones and build their houses. And as for their houses, whenever rain drops from the enveloping atmosphere, that part which is melted down by the moisture flows into the joints of the stones, and hardening there, makes the walls solid throughout. There is also mined in Arabia the gold called fireless, which is not smelted from ores, as is done among all other peoples, but is dug out directly from the earth. It is found in nuggets about the size of chestnuts, and is so fiery in colour that when it is used by artisans as a setting for the most precious gems, it makes the fairest of adornments. There is also in the land such a multitude of herds that many tribes which have chosen a nomad life are able to fare right well, experiencing no want of grain, but being provided for in abundance by their herds. That part of the country which borders upon Syria breeds a multitude of fierce wild beasts, For the lions and leopards, they are far more numerous and larger and superior in ferocity as compared with those of Libya. And in addition to these, there are the Babylonian tigers, as they are called, and it produces animals which are of double form and mingled in their natures, to which belong the Struthocameli, which, as their name implies, embrace in their form the compound of a bird and of a camel. For in size they are like a newly born camel, but their heads bristle with fine hair, and their eyes are large and black, indistinguishable in general appearance and colour from those of the camel. It is also long-necked and has a beak which is very short and contracted to a sharp point, and since it is wings with feathers which are covered with a fine hair, and is supported upon 2 legs and on feet with cloven hooves, it has the appearance of a land animal as well as of a bird. But being unable by reason of its weight to raise itself in the air and to fly, it swiftly skims over the land, and when pursued by hunters on horseback with its feet, it hurls stones as from a sling upon its pursuers, and with such force that they often receive severe wounds. And whenever it is overtaken and surrounded, it hides its head in a bush or some such shelter, not, as some men suppose, because of its folly and stupidity of spirit, as if it thought that, since it could not see the others, it could not itself be seen by others either, but because its head is the weakest part of its body, it seeks a shelter for it in order to save its life. For nature is an excellent instructor of all animals for the preservation, not only of their own lives, but also of their offspring, since by planting in them an innate love of life, she leads successive generations into an eternal cycle of continued existence. The camelopards, as they are called, represent the mixing of the 2 animals which are included in the name given to it, for in size they are smaller than the camel and have shorter necks, but in the head and the arrangement of the eyes they are formed very much like a leopard, and although they have a hump on the back like the camel, yet with respect to colour and hair they are like leopards. Likewise, in the possession of a long tail, they imitate the nature of this wild beast. There are also bred trigelaphoi, goat stags, and bubali, and many other varieties of animals which are of double form and combine in one body the natures of creatures most widely different, about all of which it would be a long task to write in detail. For it would seem that the land which lies to the south breathes in a great deal of the sun's strength, which is the greatest source of life, and that, for that reason, it generates breeds of beautiful animals in great number and of varied colour, and that for the same reason there are produced in Egypt both the crocodiles and the river horses, in Ethiopia and in the desert of Libya, a multitude of elephants and of reptiles of every variety, and of all other wild beasts, and of all other wild beasts, and of serpents, which differ from one another in size and ferocity, and likewise, in India, the elephants of exceptional bulk and number and ferocity. In these countries are generated not only animals which differ from one another in form because of the helpful influence and strength of the sun, but also outcroppings of every kind of precious stone which are unusual in colour and resplendent in brilliancy. For the rock crystals, so we are informed, are composed of pure water, which has been hardened not by the action of cold, but by the influence of a divine fire, and for this reason they are never subject to corruption and take on many hues when they are breathed upon. For instance, smaragdi and beryllia, as they are called, which are found in the shafts of the copper mines, receive their colour by having been dipped and bound together in a bath of sulphur, and the chrysoliths, they say, which are produced by a smoky exhalation due to the heat of the sun, thereby get the colour they have. For this reason, what is called false gold, we are told, is fabricated by mortal fire, made by man by dipping the rock crystals into it. And as for the natural qualities of the dark red stones, it is the influence of the light, as it is compressed to a greater or less degree in them when they are hardening, which, they say, accounts for their differences. In like manner, it is reported, the different kinds of birds get their colouring, some kinds appearing to the eye as pure red, other kinds marked with colours of every variety, one after the other, for some birds are flaming red in appearance, others saffron yellow, some emerald green, and many of the colour of gold when they turn towards the light, and, in brief, hues are produced in great variety and difficult to describe. And this same thing can be seen taking place in the case of the rainbow in the heavens, by reason of the light of the sun. And it is from these facts that the students of nature draw their arguments when they affirm that the variety of coloring that is put forth by the things which we have mentioned above was caused by the heat coincident with their creation, which dyed them, the sun, which is the source of life, assisting in the production of each several kind. And it is generally true, they continue, that of the differences in the hues of the flowers and of the varied colors of the earth, the sun is the cause and creator, and the arts of mortal men, imitating the working of the sun in the physical world, impart coloring and varied hues to every object, having been instructed in this by nature. For the colors, they continue, are produced by the light, and likewise the odors of the fruits and the distinctive quality of their juices, the different sizes of the animals and their several forms, and the peculiarities which the earth shows, all are generated by the heat of the sun, which imparts its warmth to a fertile land and to water endowed with the generative power, and thus becomes the creator of each separate thing as it is. Consequently, neither white marble of Pyros, nor any other stone which men admire, can be compared with the precious stones of Arabia, since their whiteness is most brilliant, their weight the heaviest, and their smoothness leaves no room for other stones to surpass them. And the cause of the peculiar nature of the several parts of the country is, as I have told, the influence of the sun, which has hardened it by its heat, compressed it by its dryness, and made it resplendent by its light. Hence it is that the race of birds also, having received the most warmth, became flying creatures because of their lightness, and of varied color because of the influence of the sun. This being especially true in the lands which lie close to the sun. Babylonia, for instance, produces a multitude of peacocks which have blossomed out with colors of every kind, and the farthest parts of Syria produce parrots and purple coots and guinea fowls and other kinds of animals of distinctive coloring and of every combination of hue. And the same reasoning applies also to all the other countries of the earth which lie in a similar climate, such as India and the Red Sea and Ethiopia and certain parts of Libya. But the eastern part, being more fertile, breeds nobler and larger animals. And as for the rest of Libya, each animal is produced in form and characteristics corresponding to the quality of the soil. Likewise, as regards trees, the palms of Libya bear dry and small fruit, but in Coele-Syria dates called caryoti are produced which excel as to both sweetness and size, and also as to their juices. But dates much larger than these can be seen growing in Arabia and Babylonia, 6 fingers in size and in color, either yellow like the quince, or dark red, or in some cases tending to purple, so that at the same time they both delight the eye and gratify the taste. The trunk of the palm stretches high in the air, and its surface is smooth all over as far as its crown. But though they all have a tuft of foliage at the top, yet the arrangement of the foliage varies, for in some cases the fronds spread out in a complete circle, and from the center the trunk sends up as if from out its broken bark the fruit in a cluster like grapes. In other cases the foliage at the crown droops down on only one side, so that it produces the appearance of a lamp from which the flame flares out. And occasionally they have their fronds bent down on both sides, and by this double arrangement of the branches show a crown of foliage all about the trunk, thus presenting a picturesque appearance. That part of Arabia as a whole which lies to the south is called Felix, but the interior part is ranged over by a multitude of Arabians who are nomads and have chosen a tent life. These raise great flocks of animals and make their camps in plains of immeasurable extent. The region which lies between this part and Arabia Felix is desert and waterless, as has been stated, and the parts of Arabia which lie to the west are broken by sandy deserts, spacious as the air in magnitude, through which those who journey must, even as voyagers upon the seas, direct their course by indications obtained from the bears. The remaining part of Arabia, which lies towards Syria, contains a multitude of farmers and merchants of every kind, who, by a seasonable exchange of merchandise, make good the lack of certain wares in both countries by supplying useful things which they possess in abundance. That Arabia, which lies along the ocean, is situated above Arabia Felix, and since it is traversed by many great rivers, many regions in it are converted into stagnant pools and into vast stretches of great swamps. And with the water which is brought to them from the rivers and that which comes with the summer rains, they irrigate a large part of the country and get 2 crops yearly. This region also breeds herds of elephants and other monstrous land animals, and animals of double shape which have developed peculiar forms, and in addition to these, it abounds in domestic animals of every kind, especially in cattle and in the sheep with large and fat tails. This land also breeds camels in very great numbers and of most different kinds, both the hairless and the shaggy, and those which have two humps, one behind the other, along their spines and hence are called ditulae. Some of these provide milk and are eaten for meat, and so provide the inhabitants with a great abundance of this food, and others, which are trained to carry burdens on their backs, can carry some 10 medimni of wheat and bear up 5 men lying outstretched upon a couch. Others, which have short legs and are slender in build, are dromedaries, and can go at full stretch a day's journey of a very great distance, especially in the trips which they make through the waterless and desert region. And also, in their wars the same animals carry into battle 2 bowmen who ride back to each other, one of them keeping off enemies who come on them from in front, the other those who pursue in the rear. With regard, then, to Arabia and the products of that land, even if we have written at too great length, we have at any rate reported many things to delight lovers of reading. But with regard to the island which has been discovered in the ocean to the south, and the marvellous tales told concerning it, we shall now endeavour to give a brief account, after we have first set forth accurately the causes which led to its discovery. There was a certain Iambulus, who from his boyhood up had been devoted to the pursuit of education, and after the death of his father, who had been a merchant, he also gave himself to that calling. And while journeying inland to the spice-bearing region of Arabia, he and his companions on the trip were taken captive by some robbers. Now at first, he and one of his fellow captives were appointed to be herdsmen, but later he and his companion were made captive by certain Ethiopians and led off to the coast of Ethiopia. They were kidnapped in order that, being of an alien people, they might effect the purification of the land. For among the Ethiopians who lived in that place, there was a custom which had been handed down from ancient times and had been ratified by oracles of the gods, over a period of 20 generations or 600 years, the generation being reckoned at 30 years, and at the time when the purification by means of the 2 men was to take place, a boat had been built for them sufficient in size and strong enough to withstand the storms at sea, one which could easily be manned by 2 men, and then loading it with food enough to maintain 2 men for 6 months, and putting them on board, they commanded them to set out to sea as the oracle had ordered. Furthermore, they commanded them to steer towards the south, for, they were told, they would come to a happy island and to men of honourable character, and among them they would lead a blessed existence. And in like manner, they stated, their own people, in case the men whom they sent forth should arrive safely at the island, would enjoy peace and a happy life in every respect throughout 600 years. But if, dismayed at the extent of the sea, they should turn back on their course, they would, as impious men and destroyers of the entire nation, suffer the severest penalties. Accordingly, the Ethiopians, they say, held a great festal assembly by the sea, and after offering costly sacrifices, they crowned with flowers the men who were to seek out the island and effect the purification of the nation, and then sent them forth. And these men, after having sailed over a vast sea and been tossed about 4 months by storms, were carried to the island about which they had been informed beforehand. It was round in shape and had a circumference of about 5,000 stades. But when they were now drawing near to the island, the account proceeds, some of the natives met them and drew their boat to land, and the inhabitants of the island, thronging together, were astonished at the arrival of the strangers. But they treated them honourably and shared with them the necessities of life which their country afforded. The dwellers upon this island differ greatly both in the characteristics of their bodies and in their manners from the men in our part of the inhabited world, for they are all nearly alike in the shape of their bodies and are over 4 cubits in height, but the bones of the body have the ability to bend to a certain extent and then straighten out again, like the sinewy parts. They are also exceedingly tender in respect to their bodies, and yet more vigorous than is the case among us. For when they have seized any object in their hands, no man can extract it from the grasp of their fingers. There is absolutely no hair on any part of their bodies except on the head, eyebrows and eyelids, and on the chin, but the other parts of the body are so smooth that not even the least down can be seen on them. They are also remarkably beautiful and well proportioned in the outline of the body. The openings of their ears are much more spacious than ours, and growths have developed that serve as valves, so to speak, to close them. And they have a peculiarity in regard to the tongue, partly the work of nature and congenital with them, and partly intentionally brought about by artifice. Among them, namely, the tongue is double for a certain distance, but they divide the inner portion still further, with the result that it becomes a double tongue as far as the base. Consequently, they are very versatile as to the sounds they can utter, since they imitate not only every articulate language used by man, but also the varied chatterings of the birds, and, in general, they reproduce any peculiarity of sound. And the most remarkable thing of all is that at one and the same time they can converse perfectly with two persons who fall in with them, both answering questions and discoursing pertinently on the circumstances of the moment, or with one division of the tongue they can converse with the one person, and likewise with the other talk with the second. Their climate is most temperate, we are told, considering that they live at the equator, and they suffer neither from heat nor from cold. Moreover, the fruits in their island ripen throughout the entire year, even as the poet writes, "Here pear on pear grows old, and apple close old, and apple close on apple, yea, and clustered grapes on grapes, and fig on fig. And with them the day is always the same length as the night, and at midday no shadow is cast of any object, because the sun is in the zenith. These islanders," they go on to say, "live in groups which are based on kinship and on political organizations, no more than 400 kinsmen being gathered together in this way, and the members spend their time in the meadows, the land supplying them with many things for sustenance. For by reason of the fertility of the island and the mildness of the climate, foodstuffs are produced of themselves in greater quantity than is sufficient for their needs. For instance, a reed grows there in abundance, and bears a fruit in great plenty that is very similar to the white vetch. Now when they have gathered this, they steep it in warm water until it has become the size of a pigeon's egg. Then, after they have crushed it and rubbed it skillfully with their hands, they mould it into loaves, which are baked and eaten, and they are of surprising sweetness. There are also in the island, they say, abundant springs of water, the warm springs serving well for bathing and the relief of fatigue, the cold excelling in sweetness and possessing the power to contribute to good health. Moreover, the inhabitants give attention to every branch of learning, and especially to astrology, and they use letters which, according to the value of the sounds they represent, are 20 to number, but the characters are only 7, each one of which can be formed in 4 different ways. Nor do they write their lines horizontally, as we do, but from the top to the bottom perpendicularly. And the inhabitants, they tell us, are extremely long-lived, living even to the age of 150 years, and experiencing for the most part no illness. Anyone also among them who has become crippled or suffers, in general, from any physical infirmity is forced by them, in accordance with an inexorable law, to remove himself from life, and there is also a law among them that they should live only for a stipulated number of years, and that, at the completion of this period, they should make away with themselves of their own accord by a strange manner of death. For there grows among them a plant of a peculiar nature, and whenever a man lies down upon it, imperceptibly and gently he falls asleep and dies. They do not marry, we are told, but possess their children in common, and maintaining the children who are born as if they belong to all. They love them equally, and while the children are infants, those who suckle the babes often change them around in order that not even the mothers may know their own offspring. Consequently, since there is no rivalry among them, they never experience civil disorders, and they never cease placing the highest value upon internal harmony. There are also animals among them, we are told, which are small in size but the object of wonder by reason of the nature of their bodies and the potency of their blood, for they are round in form and very similar to tortoises, but they are marked on the surface by 2 diagonal yellow stripes, at each end of which they have an eye and a mouth. Consequently, though seeing with 4 eyes and using as many mouths, yet it gathers its food into one gullet, and down this its nourishment is swallowed, and all flows together into one stomach, and in like manner its other organs and all its inner parts are single. It also has beneath it all around its body many feet, by means of which it can move in whatever direction it pleases. And the blood of this animal, they say, has a marvelous potency, for it immediately glues onto its place any living member that has been severed, Even if a hand or the like should happen to have been cut off, by the use of this blood it is glued on again, provided that the cut is fresh, and the same thing is true of such other parts of the body as are not connected with the regions which are vital and sustain the person's life. Each group of the inhabitants also keeps a bird of great size, and of a nature peculiar to itself, by means of which a test is made of the infant children to learn what their spiritual disposition is, for they place them upon the birds, and such of them as are able to endure the flight through the air, as the birds take wing they rear, but such as become nauseated and filled with consternation, they cast out, as not likely either to live many years, and being, besides, of no account because of their dispositions. In each group, the oldest man regularly exercises the leadership, just as if he were a kind of king, and is obeyed by all the members. And when the first such ruler makes an end of his life, in accordance with the law upon the completion of his 150th year, the next oldest succeeds to the leadership. The sea about the island has strong currents, and is subject to great flooding and ebbing of the tides, and is sweet in taste. And as for the stars of our heavens, the bears and many more, we are informed, are not visible at all. The number of these islands was 7, and they are very much the same in size, and at about equal distances from one another, and all follow the same customs and laws. Although all the inhabitants enjoy an abundant provision of everything from what grows of itself in these islands, yet they do not indulge in the enjoyment of this abundance without restraint, but they practice simplicity and take for their food only what suffices for their needs. Meat and whatever else is roasted or boiled in water are prepared by them, but all the other dishes ingeniously concocted by professional cooks, such as sauces and the various kinds of seasonings, they have no notion whatsoever, and they worship as gods that which encompasses all things in the sun, and, in general, all the heavenly bodies. Fishes of every kind in great numbers are caught by them by sundry devices, and not a few birds. There is also found among them an abundance of fruit trees growing wild, and olive trees and vines grow there, from which they make both olive oil and wine in abundance. Snakes also, we are told, which are of immense size and yet do no harm to the inhabitants, have a meat which is edible and exceedingly sweet. And their clothing they make themselves from a certain reed, which contains in the centre a downy substance that is bright to the eye and soft, which they gather and mingle with crushed seashells, and thus make remarkable garments of a purple hue. As for the animals of the islands, their natures are peculiar and so amazing as to defy credence. All the details of their diet, we are told, follow a prescribed arrangement, since they do not all take their food at the same time, nor is it always the same. But it has been ordained that on certain fixed days they shall eat at one time fish, at another time fowl, sometimes the flesh of land animals, and sometimes olives and the most simple side dishes. They also take turns in ministering to the needs of one another, some of them fishing, others working at the crafts, others occupying themselves in other useful tasks, and still others, with the exception of those who have come to old age, performing the services of the group in a definite cycle. And at the festivals and feasts which are held among them, there are both pronounced and sung in honor of the gods hymns and spoken laudations, and especially in honor of the sun, after whom they name both the islands and themselves. They inter their dead at the time when the tide is at the ebb, burying them in the sand along the beach, the result being that at flood tide the place has fresh sand heaped upon it. The reeds, they say, from which the fruit for their nourishment is derived, being a span in thickness, increase at the times of full moon, and again decrease proportionately as it wanes. And the water of the warm springs, being sweet and health-giving, maintains its heat and never becomes cold, save when it is mixed with cold water or wine. After remaining among this people for 7 years, the account continues, Iambulus and his companion were ejected against their will, as being malefactors and as having been educated to evil habits. Consequently, after they had again fitted out their little boat, they were compelled to take their leave, and when they had stored up provisions in it, they continued their voyage for more than 4 months. Then they were shipwrecked upon a sandy and marshy region of India, and his companion lost his life in the surf, but Iambulus, having found his way to a certain village, was then brought by the natives into the presence of the king at Palibothra, a city which was distant a journey of many days from the sea. And since the king was friendly to the Greeks and devoted to learning, he considered Iambulus worthy of cordial welcome, and at length, upon receiving a permission of safe conduct, he passed over first of all into Persia, and later arrived safe in Greece. Now, Iambulus felt that these matters deserved to be written down, and he added to his account not a few facts about India, facts of which all other men were ignorant at that time. But for our part, since we have fulfilled the promise made at the beginning of this book, we shall bring it to a conclusion at this point. The Lorb Editor's notes: 1. The Indian Ocean. 2. Lit. Of the summer turnings of the sun, i.e., the course which the sun seems to traverse in the heavens from the solstice on June 22 to the equinox in September, corresponding to the part of the earth lying between the Tropic of Cancer and the equator. 3. P. Strabo 2.5, 37. In all the regions that lie between the tropic and the equator, the shadows fall in both directions, that is, towards the north and towards the south, and the inhabitants are called Amphissians, i.e., throwing shadows both ways. T. of Jones in LCL. 4. Wheat. 5. A kind of millet, called Bosmoron in Strabo 15.1, 13. 6. This statement may be true in the sense of a general and protracted famine, but the Buddhist records often refer to scarcity of food because of drought or forces. CP. The Cambridge History of India, I 203. 7. Literally, boils or heats. Strabo 15.120 says that what other peoples call the ripening of fruits is called by the Indians the heating. Thayer's note. The same logical image occurs in other languages as well, including Latin, where coccare, to cook, is the term commonly used. Among very many examples, varo, I 54. From that use of the verb, praecox, literally early cooked, from which English and other languages get precocious and apricot, the fruit that ripens earlier than others in its family. 8. A fuller account of this incident is given in Book 17.93, but Alexander did not reach the river system of the Ganges, the error being due to a confusion of the Ganges with the Sutlej, a tributary of the Indus. Seep. W. Tarn, Alexander on the Ganges, Journal of Hellenic Studies, 43, 1923, 93 f. 9 in Book 17.93, 1, and Arian, 5.24, 8. This, the river is called the Hyphasis, which is the name preferred by most modern writers. Strabo, 15.127, 32, however, calls it the Hypanis, and Quintus Curtius, 9.11, 35, Hypasit, and the same words appear in Book 1.89. 11. It was the teaching of Aristotle that the state or city rises out of the household through the intermediate institution of the village. So the Indians, in this case, were in the second stage of this evolution. Dionysus, as is stated below, combines the villages into cities and thus makes the good life possible. 12. When Zeus, at the request of Semele, appeared to her with his thunderbolts, the sight was too much for her mortal eyes, and her child by Zeus, Dionysus, was born untimely. Zeus covered the babe in his thigh until it came to maturity. There is no agreement among modern writers on the location of Meros. 13. Arian Indica 8f. Gives a much fuller account of this daughter, whose name was Pandaea. 14. Keeb. The account of the castes in Strabo 15.1, 39f. And in Arian Indica 11f. And the article cast in the Encyclopaedia Britannica 15 Strabo, Locke. Sit says he must have erred 3 times. 16 CP. Chap 36.6 f. 17 IE of the produce. 18 the Ares. 19 the Sea of Azov. 20 the Don. 21 a similar story is in Herodotus 4.8 f, where, however, the father is Heracles and the sons are Agathyrsus, Gelonus, and Scythes. 22 presumably the south side of the Black Sea is meant. See chap 46.2. 23 in this incursion, which occurred between 630 and 625 BCE, the Scythians overran Palestine, but according to Herodotus 1.105 were turned back from Egypt by Psammetichus. A vivid picture of these foes from the north is preserved in Jeremiah 4:5 Passim 24. These are the white Syrians of Strabo 12.39. 25. There are many different accounts of the death of Cyrus, but they all agree that he met his end fighting on the far eastern border of his empire. 26. In Pontus, Seep, Strabo 12.3, 14, 15. 27. Amazon is commonly derived from A and mesos, a form of mastos, breast, and so means without a breast because the right breast was got rid of, that it might not hinder the use of the bow. Or a slightly different account keep. Book 3.53. 28. The Tarian Artemis, so well known from the Iphigenia among the Tarians of Euripides. 29. i.e., south of the Black Sea. 30. The story is given in detail in Book 4.16. 31. Quintus Smyrnaeus, 1.24f, says that she killed her sister Hippolyte on a hunt while hurling her spear at a stag. 32. There seems good reason. See R. Hennig, die Infange des Kulturellen und Handelswerke in der Mittelmeerwelt, Historische Zeitschrift, 139, 1928. 133, to see in this people who live beyond the north wind, as their names signify, an early acquaintance of the Greeks, through the medium of the Celts, with Britain and its inhabitants. In this chapter, Apollo would be the Celtic sun god Borvon, and the sacred precinct of Apollo would be the famous Stone Age remains of Stonehenge. 33, i.e., Gaul. 34, the mother by Zeus of Apollo and Artemis. 35, the island of Delos was from the earliest period of the Greek civilization a center of the worship of Apollo. 36. Abaris is apparently a purely mythical figure who in some authors sailed on his arrow, as on a witch's broomstick, through the air over rivers and seas. 37. The Metonic cycle is described in Book 12.36. The cycle of Meton, which was introduced in Athens in 432 BCE, was designed to reconcile the lunar and the solar year, the latter being reckoned at 365.5 Phi day. That this 19-year cycle was actually inaugurated at this time has been maintained most recently by W.B. Dinesmore, The Archons of Athens in the Hellenistic Age, 1931, at 321, and Passim. 38. A fuller description of this custom is given in Book 19.94 in connection with the expedition of Antigonus against the Nabateans. 39 CP. Chap. 1.5. 40. The city of Petra, rock, keep. Book 19.97 and Strabo 16.4, 21, 041. The Dead Sea, CP. Strabo 16.2, 42f. All the remainder of this chapter appears in the same words in Book 19.98, which has been the basis of many changes in the text of the present passage. 42. Asphalt, even now, occasionally floats ashore from the Dead Sea. 43. The Jordan Valley at Jericho. Or 44. Strabo, 16.241, briefly describes how the resin, perhaps the biblical balm of Gilead, was extracted from this tree. Or 45 chaps. 49, 53 are commonly attributed to Posidonius, C.P., Jacobi, G. Heist, No. 87, F114. 46. The sweet reed, sweet flag, of Theophrastus, Enquiry into Plants, 9.7, 1, 3, vol. 2, 247f, in L. 2 LL, 2, by Hort. 47. Gingergrass, Tip. Ibid. 48. Sorsura lapa, Kep. Ibid. 49. Cinnamomum Aeneas, Idem, 9.5, 3, vol. 2, 243 f, in LLCL. 50. IE, aromatic plants. 51. Turpentine tree, CP. Theophrastus, Ibid. 3.15, 3, 4, and passing. 52. These two cedars are distinguished in Theophrastus, Ibid. 3.12, 3, 4, vol. 2, 235 f, in LLCLE. 53. Juniper. 54. Presumably, the clay of the roof. 55. IE, unsmelted. 56. The miss. Right, of a goose. Oppian Synergetica 3.483 says that the animal was of the nature of a camel and of an ostrich, Strauthos. 57 cameleopards, or giraffes. 58 longer necks has been suggested. Agatharchides, App. Photius 455.4, had said that their necks were so long that they could get their food from the tops of trees. Giraffes had been exhibited in Alexandria in the 3rd century BCE, and one was brought to Rome by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. Dio 43.23, 59, apparently a kind of antelope. Thayer's note. Bobolis, bobolos, bubolos. See Mayo's note to Oppian Syneg. I. 24. 60, perhaps emeralds. 61, a diminutive of the word beryl. 62, goldstones, perhaps the topaz. 63, such as carbuncles, rubies, and garnets. 64, CP, Book 1.75. 65, IE, at the side. The lamp of Diodorus's period had its nozzle on the side opposite the handle, and so the comparison is apt. 66, Kep. Chap. 48. 67, double-humped or double-knobbed. 68, about 1412 bushels or 900 pounds. 69, perhaps Ceylon, if the unknown writer of the following account of a fabulous people and a political utopia localized it in any known spot. 70, perhaps the author of the following account, which is known only from this passage. 71, the spice-bearing country was usually placed in Somaliland, but according to Strabo 1.232, it is in Arabia, where Diodorus also apparently places it. 72 Odyssey 7.120-21, describing the land of the Phaeacians. 73, possibly a reference to rice. 74, in order to remove the husk. 75, Plato's famous theory recurs here. 76, i.e., the wet nurses of the community. 77, i.e., the atmosphere or either. 78, probably cotton is meant. 79, i.e., the islands and children of the sun. Thayer's notes. See, for example, Celsus, Passim. E.B. Everyone in antiquity agreed that rock crystal was water in a changed state, but the usual notion was that it was formed by freezing at cryogenic temperature. The loci are collected by Sir Thomas Browne, Pseudodoxia epidemica, IIE. A previous next to images with borders lead to more information. The thicker the border, the more information. Details here, up to Diodorus, classical texts, Lacuscurtius home. A page or image on this site is in the public domain only if its URL has a total of 1 asterisk. If the URL has 2 asterisks, the item is copyright someone else and used by permission or fair use. If the URL has none, the item is C. Bill Thayer. See my copyright page for details and contact information. Page updated, 13 April 18.